All right. So I call to order the May 9th Sustainability Commission. Your roll call. My list here. Jared.
Present.
Myself, David. Paul.
Present.
Nick Garson. Or he's, yeah, you just told me.
Pre-excuse us.
Steve Christensen.
Here.
And Tim Hauser.
Here.
All right. All right, we'll move to approve the agenda. Any comments on the agenda? All right, seeing none, we'll call the agenda approved by common consent. We'll move to approve the meeting minutes. Any comments on the meeting minutes?
No.
All right, seeing none, we'll call the meeting minutes approved by common consent. And we'll move to public comment. So, yes. So I have a motion for including the land acknowledgement statement prior to our meeting's start. Do I have a
Pam?
I'd second that. That's Pam.
all right?
Here, I have something I'd like to say about it.
Okay.
It's a discussion prior to voting.
Okay. Discussion for voting. Yeah.
The ultimate goal of our climate action plan, as you all know, is to build a more resilient community that can adapt to changing environmental conditions while reducing our city's carbon footprint. Through education and awareness, we can integrate a land acknowledgement and respect for the Snoqualmie tribe's wisdom into our practices and experiences, and provide information on how the community can respect, restore, and protect our environment. So I think as the Sustainability Commission, the individuals appointed to be the ones that are going to look over the community, it's just makes appropriate sense to me.
Any other? Thank you, Steve. I like that. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. And
Pam, can you hear us online?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going offline. I'm muting because my dog all of a sudden has decided he needs to bark at. See, here you go. Perfect timing.
Okay. Pam, was that an aye in favor of
wasn't-
the vote, or was that?
That was an aye from Bentley, me and Bentley.
all opposed? All right. The motion is passed.
Go ahead and read the
All
statement.
right, we'll read the statement. All right. We acknowledge that we are on indigenous land of Coast Salish people who have reserved treaty rights to this land, specifically the Snoqualmie Indian tribe. We thank these caretakers of this land. We have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial. All right. So now on to, thank you for that. Now on to public comment. And there wasn't nobody in the room.
No public comment in person, unless there was a sign up, which there was
I
not.
had one about the land acknowledgement, but we all took care of it.
Great.
Promote Mr. Stickney. Okay, I'm gonna promote Mr. Stickney to panelist right now. How long does he get to speak?
It's 3 minutes.
3 minutes. All right, Mr. Stickney, anytime you're ready.
Hello, Commission, Paul Stickney, Sammamish. Good agenda tonight. Lots of things covering that sustainability applies to. Over the next couple weeks, I'm going to send you a couple things. I'm not going to overwhelm you, but I'm going to send a thing or two that I've sent to Planning Commission, City Council, and the fiscal sustainability about a paradigm shift that I think has immense importance for your charge and what Steve Christensen aptly summarized. And that is what in the old days, 5 to 10 years ago, I called housing balance. But what it is, it's to optimize housing supplies for those that live and work in Sammamish, and it's tied to income, economic needs over life. It's tied to demographic change, workforce change. And what I have been proposing is that we increase the amount of housing supply primarily from market rate housing prices from 500 to 1.2 million. Those are all market rate. That's not affordable housing. Affordable housing below 80% area median income and lower are more current pricing from about 150 to 400,000. But I will just say that I'm going to send information, but I want to leave one quick statement about the difference between numbers and feelings. An example I've given is almost no one I know wakes up and is angry that we're 93 million miles away from our sun, and that's a number. Why? Because our Earth is in a habitability zone that happens to be within a window that allows water for habitability, which is why we're all here. The numbers I'm going to be suggesting that we need to add are from tremendous resource and conclusion of quantified factors to have habitability for lifetime and legacy and add riches to our community. So anyway, I'm going to send that. Take a look. It's just the background information like what you're getting tonight on these different topics. Appreciate the chance to speak.
Wait. One more. There we go.
And I see no more attendees.
Great. If you could promote me so I can screen share for the next item, that would be great. Thank you. All right, so next we are going to be reviewing the city work plan. Go ahead and pull up my screen here. Great. So the purpose of this agenda item is to kind of right size and educate all of you about all of the work plan items going on citywide and kind of lay out the 2024 work plan. Some of these items you've heard about before, and they're going to be the focus of the Sustainability Commission, but we want you to understand how that fits into the wider work plan and the work being done in other departments. So this document was provided to all commissioners as one of the agenda items, so you can review it in the future. There's a little bit of kind of explanation of how to read through this document. Each section has definitions of success. So those are the guiding principles and the overarching goals. And then there are different actions. So you may recognize some of these actions. We've got Climate Action Plan implementation, the Sustainable Sammamish Guide, the East Side Climate Partnership. RE Plus has to do with waste management. Our fleet electrification assessment, you'll be hearing a little bit more about later today. A green purchasing policy is in the works and will be available for future review on future agendas. The Sustainability Commission implementation and staffing is why we are all here today. And then Urban Forest Management Plan implementation will be later in fall, as we've previously discussed. Tree City USA is also underway. We had that great Arbor Day event with council. And related to Tree City, we have our right-of-way tree study, as well as the critical areas ordinance update, which you'll be hearing about today from the Department of Community Development, as well as a Pine Lake Creek Basin Plan. So these are all of the sustainability and environment related items, most of which are on my work plan or the commission work plan. Some of this work is ongoing, so they will be past 2024 and into future years. In fact, most of the work will be continuing on to future years.
I just want to add that these are large ticket items, right? We don't put the day-to-day stuff in there, so we're not going to put in there all of the restoration work that we do on a daily or weekly basis, right? So when you're thinking of the work plan, those are big ticket items. There's a lot of other things going on in the city that are, you know, sustainability or environmental related. So just want to set that expectation. And same with everything else, with all the other goals.
Yeah. So just kind of talking high level through the remainder of this work plan, giving you an understanding of that is the sustainability items. We also have a number of capital projects. So these are large projects. They involve construction and significant city investment or partnership investments. And that is all of the environment goals. We also have trust and transparency goals. So that is the resident survey that some of you may have received, the sustainability dashboard that we'll be working on. Obviously, that does relate to the environment, but is part of the city trying to communicate and be transparent with the community. Looking through, there's a lot of items here, so I'm not going to go through every single one, but just kind of wanted to give you an understanding of the level of work and effort that's going into 2024 by staff. Rachel, was there anything else you wanted to highlight from the
I just
plan?
think, so we have 6 major goals or buckets, right? So public safety is obviously a big one. Again, there's some overlap here, right? As we look at resiliency, wildfire resiliency is something that we're, you know, this group is going to be looking at and thinking about moving forward. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is a big goal for this city. And so we'll be doing some work on this. I don't have them memorized, so you're gonna keep going here for me, Rose. Housing. You're gonna hear there's a lot about housing going on. The comprehensive plan that you all talked about last meeting obviously has a big thing on housing, and comp plan is there. The work that we're doing on the town center is there. Mary Wichter is out there.
Mary, we're in here.
Some of the building codes of all of this really relates to housing as lots of different tentacles. And then the last one.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Then yes, of course, the financial sustainability work that is ongoing and important. And a big part of this is, and you'll all be a part of this, is when we start working on developing the biennial budget. We are going to change the way that we do our budget in a couple of different ways. One, which is budgeting more towards the actual expenses than we have historically done. The second thing is a citywide comprehensive, what we call a CIP, right, which is a capital improvement plan. We're going to have one-stop shopping for all of our capital improvement plans. So what that's really going to do is to be able to show us all of the responsibilities we have. It's kind of like having a house, right? You don't just have whatever you have to do in the yard and whatever you have to do for your plumbing and whatever you have to do for, you know, you want it all in one place so that you can figure out exactly how much you can do in the yard and exactly how much you can do with the plumbing. So those are going to be some things that some of that will come to you all, especially as we're looking at the sustainability budget for the coming biennium. So we thought this was important just to ground the work that you all are doing in the overall city work that we do, because cities have a lot of hats. And we're happy to answer questions about any of this now or later. You know, it's really kind of looking for your what would be of help to you.
No, I think. we all
I'm
appreciate
curious.
that.
Pam, go ahead.
So I saw something about grants and I was just curious what that was. It was several screens ago.
Process. So also.
Oh, yeah, we're looking at a comprehensive citywide process to grants. That's been well, we have human services grants. That's something that we do on a biennial basis to fund different partners in the community. And then one of the things that we're looking at internally is how can we have a better internal grants process, right there, T8.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
I have a question in, in the safety section. Two items, S1 and S4. We have an updated evacuation plan. I know I've heard, going back many city council meetings and planning commission meetings and so on, I've heard that there is one, but I haven't seen it. Now, is that something that's accessible on the website?
So my understanding, Steve, and I'm still relatively new here, is that we did a study. And now the next thing is the plan, and that's part of what we're working on this year.
Right. And then the other thing is this community wildfire protection plan. Now, probably nearly a year ago, one of my neighbors told me that Eastside Fire has got a service. Well, they'll come out and look at around your house and tell you whether or not you're fire safe or not, what to do about getting flammable materials away from your house. So I signed up for that and I didn't hear anything. And then about January, I got an email from, I can't remember her name, but I haven't heard anything from it yet, but apparently is she the only one that's doing the surveys?
My understanding is that they have one person right now. We also, as the city and EFR, need to do some more coordination on those
Okay.
assessments. Our tree ordinance, for instance, may not jive with what they come out and tell you you should do in order to be fire safe,
I suspect not,
right?
because I could see some neighborhoods where, you know, you've got a high housing density where there isn't much flammable material around to burn, but in my neighborhood, we're on big lots with a lot of trees, and some people have, you know, trees within a few feet of their house and bushes, and according to what I've heard is that's even wooden decks are something that you probably ought to be doing. And so getting that information out, in my view, is sooner rather than later, given that we're probably gonna have a real hot summer this year. Is something that is probably, the urgency is being felt, at least by me, not as a commission member necessarily, but as a resident.
As a homeowner, yeah. That is something that, you know, we need to figure out is how do we strike that balance,
Yeah.
right? And that is gonna be something that's probably gonna be a longer term issue. I know David's been real involved. There's the WUI, the wildland urban interface, right? Which part of our city is within, which basically means you're in the potential zone, right? There's been some state law changes and there's a lot of churn right now. I hear you and feel you on the urgency. I'm gonna be transparent, is that that's not gonna be something we're gonna figure out
Well, I
soon, but
personally, I tried to figure out some of it. I got a lot of the
yep,
down to debris in my
Yep.
backyard in the woods. I got a chipper up there and some people down.
that's good.
Now it's all mulch and not.
Eber has a really good graphic if you go on their website that really tells you, so within, 6 feet of your home should be X, 10 feet Y, 30 feet Z type of a thing. So if that's of interest, I would recommend taking a look at that. But, and I think, Steve, part of what you bring up is your own personal commitment to resiliency, right? And I think that's something that, again, just like we're hoping that you all will help change hearts and minds on the sustainability, is how does this, what's the role of this commission to go to neighbors and say, hey, you need to be prepared, right? So whether it's food, water, or, making sure your house is as resilient as possible to wildfire. So there's gonna be a lot more discussion on this moving forward.
Alright. Any other comments on that? Moving on to critical areas ordinance update. Is that what's next?
Yes.
All right.
It's up to the, it's totally up to you all, if you want,
Can I move to,
as long as the rest of the commission
Alright.
can move to amend the agenda.
yeah, make it a move to amend the agenda to, for public comment. If, Mary, do you have public comment?
I do.
So.
We do need a second.
All, does
I'll
anybody
second
second?
that.
All right,
And then
all in favor?
After on it.
All right, approve.
No, you can just stay there. I'm gonna talk about you. Teen. Critical, my name's Mary Wichter, and I've lived in St. Anderson's Corporation in 2000. I normally speak on getting tighter code because critical areas are being developed in and they shouldn't be. And also for stormwater, because when you have development and it occurs and then you do stormwater, you end up with cumulative effects of flooding and pollution and things. So I had sent in an email about, it was as brief as I could make. If you don't know anything about critical areas, I would suggest that you read that. The biggest thing you can do as a sustainability commission is realize that when we're building in steep slope areas or we're building large houses on our size lots, you're ending up sprawling the city. If you can get those units stacked in a center area, best of all town center, I think he was saying mid-rise even for apartments, then you get like one unit with 1, 2, 3, 4 units on it. You don't need to put sewer, water pipes and other things going on. Also, if you get more density, you'll probably get smaller units and you probably get more affordability. So you're increasing everybody there. Those people would not have kids, would not have a car, would be able to walk and shop at the businesses and walk to schools. So probably the biggest thing you can do is support doing centers. Our town center is kind of a bowl ready. I think, I don't know how many millions of dollars we spent to put the road there. My husband calls it Desolation Alley because like there's just people walking and there's nothing else growing on it, but it's super important. So what these people are doing is we need to identify, we need to delineate, we need to protect the areas you are not supposed to be building in those areas because of some code people still try. So there's a transfer of development rights program where you try to send it to the, so instead of building where you're not supposed to build by Department of Commerce and GMA, you can send it to the city center or other places where there is water, sewer, storm, and the other utilities adequate for occupancy. So that's my short thing. And then I've been advocating since 2015. There's been problems since 2003 to 2017. I've seen a lot of plans get adopted and sometimes it's hard to get stuff to work. So since your sustainability, I want to say there's ideas that you can do for sharing. And I just put 3 down. I see people idling in the library underground parking. I see them idling at the soccer field. I see them idling at school. Stop idling. Maybe get out of the car, dress right, walk a little bit. On recycling, learn, like I've heard city council say, hey, do you recycle the bottle with the top on it or not? What can I mix? Where does styrofoam go? Is that still recyclable once a year? And then also it's not OCD to be ECD. ECD is empty, clean, and dry. I heard Christy Malchow, who was former mayor and deputy mayor, she said that at one meeting, empty, clean, and dry. And I was like, boy, I wish you could tell my 14 other neighbors, because if you have one person who's not doing that, they'll actually contaminate it for everybody else. So there's a list of things that I think when you guys say your name at the beginning, you could say what you did this month for sustainability. And then since I won't have time, I did buy these charts. They're about how to build community and how to build global communities, kind of DEIB. How to build community has these things. I've read it before. People love it. It was written in New York by Syracuse cultural workers. And then here's one on global warming. And I can give it to you or donate it to the library. I think you guys could actually come up with better things for it. So those are just ideas I wanted to share about things that could happen today. Please share them. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me. I thought the meeting started at 6:30. Oh, and I didn't even time myself. Thank you, Rick. And yeah, you can do it. There's also online versions.
Okay, go ahead and screen share whenever you're ready.
All right, let me know if you can see my screen okay.
Yes.
All right, good evening, commissioners. My name is Jackie Boleel. I'm a management analyst with community development, and I'll be introducing our critical areas ordinance update tonight. And I am joined by David Pyle, our Community Development Director, and Avril Beatty, who is our current Planning and Permit Center Manager. The purpose of tonight's presentation is to give an overview of the critical areas ordinance update. We'll go over some of the project background and where we are in the process and what the next steps are. And then we'll also be sharing some more information about the critical area types. So a quick overview of our project timeline. We met in October of 2023 during the joint Planning Commission and City Council meeting to present the findings of the review and analysis of the current critical areas ordinance. Since then, we have had 2 work sessions with the Planning Commission to review the proposed changes that were identified by the project team, which consists of staff and our consultants at Facet, formerly known as DCG Watershed. They've had a name change recently. This is a fairly long list of items, so the work was split into 2 meetings, focusing on 3 types at each meeting. And then just on Tuesday, we presented the proposed changes to the City Council and asked for feedback on specific changes. And then next, we'll be returning to the Planning Commission to review the draft critical areas ordinance before their public hearing in July. And then we'll return to Council in October for a review of the draft before the public hearing in November. So in between those meetings, we will also have a booth at the Farmers Market on May 15th, and we'll present a project overview to the Parks Commission as well. Some background on the project. Critical areas are defined in the city. They are areas that are erosion hazard areas, frequently flooded areas, landslide hazard, seismic hazard, critical aquifer recharge areas, wetlands, streams, and fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas. The process that we are following, the city is required to review and update our critical areas ordinance to align with best available science, and our deadline of December 31st is set by the state law. In this case, the critical areas ordinance update is happening parallel to the comprehensive plan update. So we are working closely with that project team, and the update must follow the Department of Commerce's checklist, and it must also be reviewed by the Department of Commerce and the Department of Ecology. So there are 6 types of critical areas, and then also several areas of special focus that were chosen by the council as being particularly important to Sammamish. And in the agenda packets of our public meetings, we have included the critical area type summary sheets. The project team created those to help our commissions and council and the public learn about what these critical area types are, why they're protected, how they're protected, how they should be protected, and a lot more background information. And they also include the full list of proposed changes for each type. It's a very technical topic, and we hope that these summary sheets have been helpful. They are available with the agenda packets for the meetings we've presented at, and they're also available on the website on the project page. In addition to the summary sheets, the 3 reports that were completed during the review and analysis portion of the project are the existing conditions assessment, the best available science report, and the gap analysis, and those are also available on the project page of the website. If you have any questions about these resources or would like me to email you a copy, please feel free to reach out. And then I will hand it over to Avril, who can go over the proposed changes.
So go back to the previous slide. So the update to our critical area ordinance is complex. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of different things involved. So in order to make the analysis by decision makers more digestible, we broke down the changes into these 3 categories. The first category are minor or clerical or clarifications or required by the Growth Management Act. So no-brainer category. Category 2, these are ones that we wanted some real analysis and some public discussion behind, but not super complicated or potentially controversial. Whereas category 3 was something that could potentially be a more significant shift, or could impact more people, or could have a big impact to our budget or our timeline, and might require future work plan and budgeting. So that's how we categorized all the things that we were gonna do. Next slide, Jackie. So we're gonna go through the different types of critical areas. So our first one, and these are just in alphabetical order because that was easier for us. Critical aquifer recharge areas. These areas are determined by the water and sewer districts for Sammamish. We don't determine where these areas are. And these areas need to be protected so that we all have safe water to drink. And part of that is making sure that any surface waters that can get infiltrated into the aquifers are free of heavy metals, forever chemicals, or anything else that could potentially be harmful. So that's why those are important. Next slide, Jackie. Frequently flooded areas. These are areas that are prone to flooding. Within the city, we only have mapped flooded areas along the shoreline of the lake, of Lake Sammamish specifically. There's no other mapped flooding areas within the city. Doesn't mean water doesn't accumulate. That's just what we have formally mapped. So those areas are protected to keep, this is more of a public health and safety regulation. We want to make sure structures and other things are not being built where they shouldn't be, where they can be flooded and ruined, or we don't really have the issue of like tsunamis or whatnot, but the general approach to frequently flooded areas are for those sort of protections. And this is, there is the, by having these regulations, it reduces the annual cost of flood insurance for people who have their properties along those mapped floodplains. Next one, Jackie.
I'm assuming that's pretty much all residential.
Yes, residentially zoned. We have some parks, so there are some non-residential uses along the lake, but it is like 99% residential, yeah. So our geologically hazardous areas, this is a very large umbrella that covers many different types or subtypes. So we have erosion, we have landslide, we have seismic hazards. And so erosion hazards are where you have surface slough, where there could be sediment and whatnot, soils that can get into water and then pollute into streams and into the lakes. Landslide is actual earth movement that can pull a building down with it, where it's not just like a surface failure, it's a deeper failure to the surface of the planet. Seismic hazards, we have liquefaction. This occurs along the lake where you have more sandy soils. I don't know if you ever see those like school classroom science experiments where you have the sand with the water and then the little Lego structure on top. They shimmy the whole thing and the little structure sinks down into the sand. So that's liquefaction. So it is a real, yeah. So these are more things that need to be protected physically, like, and to protect us within the physical environment. So we need to protect ground cover. We need to make sure that these slopes are stable, both on a surface level and deeper down. So this is usually addressed with how we deal with construction in terms of keeping things in place, both surface with dirt or erosion, or if you can engineer something to be safe in a million different ways also. So trying to figure out how to keep things safe and keep things in place where they should be on multiple levels. Next one, Jackie. Habitat conservation areas and migration corridors. This is all about protecting local animal and plant species. So we have areas around what we refer to as aquatic resources. Those are like streams and wetlands, ponds, lakes, where animals can live. And there's a challenge, and this is everywhere in the world, where habitats for animals get smaller and smaller and smaller as people go further and further out. And so as these pockets of area where these animals can live become smaller, those potential mates, that gene pool also becomes smaller and is not good for longevity of a healthy population of creatures. So we are going to try to help them out by having areas that are identified as good connectivity between areas of habitat. So it's not just where they live. Most of the time, it's how they can get to each other.
Like a trail?
A trail, a pathway, something, and different animals move in different ways. So I'm trying to not think that it only needs to be for deer, right? Deer can cross roads and jump 12-foot tall fences. But then there's like salamanders or other amphibians where they need wet-ish soil to get from one pond to another. So there's different things that we have to think about so that these places are successful.
Can I pause you for a minute?
Yes.
So one thing I heard part of your earlier conversation that is particularly important here is it's not just the tree rules that are complex when talking about fire safe and clear zones. It's also if we, and I don't want to use a term that has political charge to it, but if we rake the forest floor, we also cause an issue with habitat. So when we're told by fire that, oh, you need to remove all of this debris from your property, it's also degrading the habitat in the city. So, you know, every action has a consequence that goes along with it. And it's a very complex topic when we start to talk about being fire wise and how we navigate between our tree rules, our natural habitats, and protect our structures and people. So sorry about that.
Some of this habitat conservation areas could be on private property.
Most of
Almost
them,
all of it is, yeah.
Okay.
So given that Sammamish is, you know, is built out, there aren't big swaths of land left. We are looking at where these streams cross over like through neighborhoods and might crisscross, you know, dozens of properties before it gets to a lake or wherever, or there's wetlands that can cross over many properties. So when we're looking at these, it's not just places where the city might have a park or something where the city would control that or the county would. This is mostly pertains to residents and their homes. So we're keeping that in mind also, like how can we provide these protections while balancing out what controls are appropriate over someone's home. So it's all of that.
You guys have exponentially complicated your permitting process, I'm assuming, with, I mean, you know, all for different reasons and good purposes,
Yeah.
but, you know, I've been watching a lot of the old city council meetings and there's people complaining about the permitting process already. And, you know, it sounds like this is going to layer on top of that. And so there's a huge challenge for you guys to.
So a lot of these rules, so these rules are an update. So we have a lot of these rules are existing. We probably should have given a little bit more on that background. So we have regulations for all of these things already.
Okay.
And we already have a lot of protections in place for streams and geohazard areas and whatnot. The challenge that we have is there's lots of different regulations and a lot of them now overlap. And a lot of them were put in place before there were other types of regulations for stormwater. And there's I don't know if you've all read the very thrilling 1,100-page King County Surface Water Design Manual. So those were regulations that have been adopted since some of these went into effect. So there's a lot of overlap and redundancies. And then we have planners who aren't engineers with our regulations. And then we've got public works who are engineers with their regulations. And we're trying to like make sure things comply with all these different sets of rules.
I'd add to that we're pretty good at solving problems, but we don't always think about the balance of the regulations that are in the code. And oftentimes things are additive without thinking about where else we might want to interconnect that new approach to how we handle something. So one of the things we're doing with this update is we're looking more cohesively across all of the rules that pertain to our natural resources in the city. And we're trying to eliminate redundancies, which result in additional expense and delay for permitting. And hopefully we will have some margin of success. It's a very challenging, but we're working on it. And we're trying to be mindful going forward when we do put new rules in place, that we're not just adding another chapter, adding another line. It's what does it currently say and how do we thread it in and amend what's there already?
I
And
like-
making sure that that regulation has value to it and not just add red tape to the process.
And like you say, whenever you pull one lever, there's multiple
Something
other
else gotta
things that,
give.
the ripple effect thing,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah.
you know, you gotta think through all that. So that sounds very complicated. I'm
Yeah.
glad it's you guys doing it.
Well, we're trying, and with this, we're trying to, the overall unofficial goal is to help minimize the brain damage by trying to do cleanups and trying to get things to align and looking at everything holistically. So that this, if the city staff has an easier tool to use, if that's just as effective, then it's easier for the residents to understand. It's easier for us to all move forward with whatever's getting proposed. Oh,
It would seem to me that also one of the things you need to consider, when you talked about frequently flooded areas, I thought, well, how frequent is frequent?
not, well, so there's,
Can you quantify that? And Is,
Yeah,
if-
absolutely.
if I'm driving down a hill on the flatland out of my neighborhood, and there's a strip on the road that's say 50 feet wide and the water's 2-3 inches deep because it's coming down a little stream. Is that a frequently flooded area? Because it's a bother if I gotta walk through it, but not if I have to drive through it. But
So
so how does that stack up in
yes,
your?
state law defines it as the FEMA 100-year floodplain. So we look to the Federal Emergency Management Agency through their digital flood insurance rate maps, they have mapped and they update because they are the ones that underwrite insurance policies for homes. They routinely update their maps and they set the base flood elevation, and homeowners and property owners are not allowed to build amenities that would be insured below that base flood elevation that is typical to flood on a 100-year cycle.
And you guys know where that line is.
We do have those maps. They're provided by FEMA, and we require that surveyors pick up the elevation of those locations on properties when development is proposed adjacent to a known mapped floodplain. Other areas in the city, as Avril said, do impound water, do collect water. We have the option of adding, just to be totally transparent, additional requirements for properties that, as you identified, could frequently flood. However, we have not historically chosen to do that. Most of those areas are also streams or wetlands in the city. So we already have regulations that address those. So adding that additional layer of regulation would have really marginal impact on managing resources in the city, but yet a high cost for administration.
And you've got critters in this city that like to build dams.
most of them are native.
Yeah.
So we'll continue. I got us sidetracked a little bit.
That was me. We could talk about this all day.
Yeah, we did. So another type of critical area are streams. And we do have discussions about if something actually is a stream or not. So so part of it is looking at what's a stream. There are seasonal streams where you might only see surface waters during the winter time. And part of this is also looking at how do we go from right now, we sort of focus on the stream itself, and better ecological practices is to look at the stream's environment, and that whole area around the stream is referred to as a riparian area. So we're shifting our terminology from stream to riparian to look at that whole area, because it's not just the water flowing that may or may not have fish in it. It's also all the vegetation, because all of that filters out any chemicals or heavy metals or whatever before the water gets there. It provides habitat for all sorts of critters, some of which might want to dam it up sometimes. They need a permit, but they probably won't get one. So looking at it more holistically in terms of where do animals live? Do they use it for migrating around? So there's lots of features and functions to it beyond just the channel of water. So we've been looking at how better to protect it, while not making it overly complicated. Because if it gets overly complicated and someone calls us up and we say, oh, you've got to learn multivariable calculus and then you can come back with your report and then maybe we'll talk to you. Then people will just go do whatever. Like, what? No. So having regulations that are protective but easy to understand will be more enticing for people to want to follow the rules and be able to move forward with the permits that they're supposed to get and have the protections that we are aiming to have. Next one, Jack. Oh,
I want to add to that also, there are multiple ways to protect riparian areas. And one is that many of our riparian areas in the city are somewhat degraded. I'm not really sure that we have many wholly intact riparian areas left in the city, being an exurban slash suburban environment. People have been here for a while. They've done things. There's multiple ways to do this, and the prescriptive method that you most often see is to just simply apply a bigger buffer. If you want more protection, make the buffer bigger, right? 100 feet this year, well, 5 years later, the state's going to come back and say, we recommend 100. The challenge is that in a built environment, you end up with homes and other amenities being built in certain areas that are pretty large investments. In many cases, there are homes that are built right up against the edge of a 100-foot buffer off of the stream. So if we were to follow the simple method of just making the buffer bigger, the compounding effect is that those homes become legally non-conforming. They're very difficult to insure. They have a brand on the title. If you were to try to sell your home, you're now confronted with the issue that you have what's called a legally non-conforming property. There are limitations on what you can do if the home were to burn down and you wanted to rebuild it. So there are all sorts of implications in a built environment. If we were out in a greenfield area and building, from new cloth, sure, I understand adding a bigger buffer. Instead, we focus on the quality of the buffer and wanting to restore that buffer with better understory and with native vegetation and trying really to make that function better than it does today. So that's the approach that we take, given the issue that we are, along many of our streams, we're largely built out. So that's something that we want to also keep in mind.
next slide, Jackie. So finally, we have wetlands.
I'm going to
so-
interrupt for just a second. I'm hearing jazz music in the background.
You're missing the party.
Am I
I
just?
can hear that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a police banquet going on, so the door is closed, but there is some
Oh,
jazz music
okay.
still coming through. So as long as
Okay.
you can still hear the speakers.
I can hear, I'm just like,
Yeah,
I'm
no worries.
Not imagining things.
It's not in your head.
I do want to keep us aware of time. We've got maybe 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay, so wetlands, these can be the little soggy bits in someone's backyard. It can also be a small lake, because a lake is only defined as 20 surface acres, something. So if you're 19, you're not a lake, you're just a wetland. And which I learned, which I thought was fascinating. Anyways, so wetlands provide lots of amazing habitat. They tie in with the connectivity with all the streams that are throughout the city. We have really good wetland regulations already. We work really hard to help residents avoid impacts to the wetlands on their properties or to minimize for it. We are relatively successful with doing that because we have a lot of people that end up mad at us because they have an idea of, oh, I have this great, stream going through my backyard, but there's this really soggy part and my dog runs through it and his paws get all muddy. So I just would rather take that out, fill it in, put in a sub drain, flatten out my backyard, put some lawn back there. It'll be really nice. I'm like, I know that sounds really nice, but that's a wetland and it's not allowed. So anecdotally, I can tell you, because I don't have data to say how many people we make unhappy with these regulations, but it's there. But generally when we talk through why we have these protections in place, generally people then learn about it and then they appreciate the feature that it is. So So here we're not changing, we're not looking to change many of our wetland regulations, but more tying it in with the habitat component of the critical areas update, unless I'm forgetting something. Okay, great. Was there another slide after this, Jackie?
I just wanted to include this slide just because tonight's presentation was a very high level overview, and we do have several public meetings coming up. I would encourage you all to read through the summary sheets and the list of proposed changes. I will go ahead and email those to Rose, and Rose, if you wouldn't mind distributing those, that would be helpful. And we would just encourage, if you guys have any other thoughts, please reach out to us. But also, if you are interested in attending or providing comment at any of the upcoming meetings, we would encourage you all to do that. But thank you, everyone, for your time tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jackie.
You guys have any other questions?
Yeah, I have a couple.
Thank you, Jackie.
Maybe it's just an impression on how you presented it, but it felt like the wetlands works better. Is that true, or is that just maybe
So
your
we have the least amount of difficulty getting mitigation protections in place with projects with wetlands, because from residents, they are very identifiable. People see the plants, they probably see or hear the critters that live there. And so when we talk about those protections, it's easier to work with a resident to figure something out.
We as a country have also made major strides in protection of aquatic resources. And it's something that I think everybody, has my generation particularly, and my kids are growing up with it, but that hear a lot about water quality. You hear a lot about things you shouldn't be doing because it would affect the stream or the wetland and the lake. And so while there's a lot we can still do, don't get me wrong, we have awareness around streams and wetlands. We also have more historical rule sets related to streams and wetlands that have been on the books for a lot longer than some of our newer rules around geohazards and erosion hazards. And we've learned more that, hey, these erosion hazards affect water quality. We need to regulate them. But those are things that aren't at the front of someone's mindset when they're wanting to do something to their home. So we have been more successful, I think, just in part because there's more acceptance in the community about streams and wetlands and how important they are. Although people still people desire to make changes, right? I mean, people love to have a nice backyard. It's just part of owning property and having a house and a family. And sometimes finding out that they can't necessarily do that is not always the most pleasant place to be in that point in time.
Got it. Okay. So been around longer and more awareness generally in the population is why those are more successful. Mimic that with the other places. Obviously time is just time, but it's an awareness problem, which is a pretty consistent theme we're hearing across the board. Okay. And then what does it mean to protect? What
So
does
sometimes
definition
it's
of protect
actual,
here?
so there's a term that we use called mitigation sequencing. So nerd alert. Mitigation sequencing, the first thing you do is you want to avoid having any negative impacts. So if you have that wetland in your backyard and you've got all the plants for a long time and it's very natural looking, and then you have your lawn, and you're like, well, I want to make my lawn bigger. Well, no, that's an established wetland, that's the established buffer. So we're going to tell you no, and you're going to avoid making an impact because you're not doing anything. And then, but if someone has a property, and this happens quite a bit in Sammamish, there are properties where there are wetlands, multiple wetlands and streams going through one property. And if you overlay all the protections and all the buffers, there's not a square foot left that's not encumbered by these regulations. So we have some limited release valves in order for people to be able to do something with their property because of the Constitution. We can't have a taking of property. That's unconstitutional. So we figure out with someone like, okay, so we can't avoid an impact because you are allowed by right to build a house here. So then how can we minimize that impact? So we look at placement and sizing, and is there an area that's more degraded? Like there's a huge blackberry infestation in this area. and it's flatter, so it makes more sense to move it here than over to another area that's got, you know, better native vegetation in place already. And then, and if that's the location that gets decided on, and then trying to do any restoration after the fact and do enhancements to the areas that might have had invasive species in there to get it cleaned up. So we're looking at like, how can we avoid it? How can we minimize for it? How do you make the impact as small as possible? And how do you mitigate for it by trying to make it better once you're doing the work or you've done the work?
So that plus, if you're doing a bigger project, like say a subdivision, when you say you had a wetland or a stream on your property and a protected buffer, we require that you take that land that is the resource plus its protective buffer and put it into a easement that is a conservation easement. And it's a set aside. You don't walk around, drive around, you see these subdivisions where there's homes that are clustered, and then there's a big, you know, native growth area that's set aside. Those are set aside in perpetuity and you cannot develop in that area. So that's another form of protection, but that's avoidance. But once it's avoided, then we go to the next step and we actually layer over the top of that a protected easement that doesn't allow somebody to, you know, to sell it to an HOA, to sell it to somebody else who wants to then build something on it, right? We have those challenges, trust me, and we have to work through those pretty carefully because we do have some older divisions that don't have that, where we've seen the HOA literally sell a piece of property to somebody and somebody thought they were going to build something on it and we had to unwind the whole thing back to the sale. So those are some of the complexities that we deal with.
Any other?
Any additional questions, maybe we'll save for email and we can answer at a future meeting in the Q&A
Yeah.
document.
And you know, we're pretty passionate about this stuff. And if you wanted to talk about it, go get coffee about it, you know, go get coffee at Met Market, talk through critical areas, you know, definitely we're available.
Yeah, I think, just my opinion, that was more informative and I think one of the best presentations. You know, this is only our fourth meeting, but you know, understanding what else the city has going on as we're trying to advise the city council on sustainability and environment and all the climate action stuff. You know, the climate action plan is already very complicated, but now understanding this side of it as well, I think it would be very helpful as we move forward.
And that is a perfect segue into another complicated.
Thank you for having me.
Jackie,
Yeah.
David.
Thank you
Avril,
very
well
much,
done.
David. Thank you, Avril. Thank you, Jackie. So.
You could present.
So I just did. It looks different on my screen. One moment.
Anybody else need a water?
Thanks.
That's pretty upbeat, isn't it?
Doesn't scream high school, but Explorers to me.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, so the Explorers are a youth program basically for police.
Like DC, right?
A little bit, yeah.
My Zoom is crashing here. Sorry, folks. Okay. Rachel, are you able to pull this up? I keep getting this same notification. It keeps clicking on me. That.
Technology's great when it works.
Rose, you could do it on this computer if you can navigate to the presentation, like on the P drive or something.
I can, it's not on the P drive, but I can send it to you, Rich, if you wouldn't mind running it.
feel like I'm missing some snazzy party music over there.
Did you send it on, was it Teams?
I just sent it over Teams, yeah. Wait, that second one,
Down below, look.
the second one, that
This
one.
one?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I can barely see that. Okay.
No worries. Teamwork makes the dream work.
That's funny, I always said to my kids.
Yeah. So we will just scroll through. For context, we're gonna be moving through a little bit quickly. This is a very comprehensive presentation. Sammamish has been working with a consultant, Makers Consulting, subcontracting with McKinstry. And we are doing a fleet electrification study with this consultant. So they looked comprehensively at the city fleet and the city infrastructure to support the fleet if we were to move towards electrification in alignment with our 2030 and 2050 emissions goals. So this presentation that you're about to see today is going to be presented to council at next Tuesday's study session by our consultants. We did want to make sure the Sustainability Commission gets a chance to see it as well. I do encourage you, if you are interested in this work, to attend that study session to get the comprehensive presentation from the consultants themselves. I am familiar with this work. I will be giving the presentation today. I will be able to answer most questions, but if you have specific technical or pointed questions, again, I encourage you to come to that study session and listen in. All right. So the project was very comprehensive, as I mentioned, and it will actually require 2 separate study sessions for council. So this first session on the 14th, we are going to be going over the Sammamish electrification targets, McKinstry and Makers assessment of our fleet vehicles, as well as the assets that we have. So that's off-road equipment such as Kubotas, bulldozers. So it's not just the fleet vehicles like cars and trucks driving around, it's also that off-road equipment that is emission producing as well. They did put together an electrification approach and cost estimate in alignment with those 2030 and 2050 goals. So what it would take to get there and how much it would cost. And then at a future meeting, we will be going over the investment strategy and public charging. So what it would look like if the city were to make investments in public charging infrastructure. This study was looking specifically at city fleet and city infrastructure. So how to green our municipal operations. There's some important definitions to be aware of. The 3 vehicle classes, light duty, medium duty, heavy duty, as well as types of vehicles. So ICE vehicles are the emission producing, EV is fully electric, and then there's hybrid alternative vehicles. So that's hybrid vehicles or plug-in hybrid vehicles. I'll get into R99 fuel at a future slide. And then I did want to just right side the emissions factor, which is the carbon dioxide equivalent. So that is a industry standard, and that is also the metric that we use for our climate action plan goal setting.
And is the transportation on the slide a couple back, it's a small piece of the footprint overall for the city operations.
Yeah, so that's actually the next slide. Go ahead,
Oh,
Rich. Thank you. Up a little bit. Perfect. So just setting expectations. So we do have this 50% reduction by 2030 and 96% by 2050, recognizing that transportation is one part of that wider emissions goal. But the city does want to set an example and set precedent. So we asked our consultant to make a fleet electrification projection in alignment with reaching a 50% reduction by 2030 in our municipal fleet emissions, and then aiming towards 96% by 2050. That being said, there's a lot more work to be done with natural gas and electricity. So this is one small part of the commission's work, which is why we're moving through this relatively quickly. This was a lot of internal work, but there's not a lot for you all to review. It's more of an FYI, and then please, again, ask questions, stop me.
It's a very visible part. Of
It
the
is
city
Very
doing
visible
something.
part, right? I will also say is when we get to the, back to what I was saying earlier about we're gonna have this CIP and we're gonna have to make decisions about, council members are gonna have ultimately make decisions about investments at the end of the day, right? This does not have a small price tag at the end. The council is going to have to make are they gonna do this or that, or a combination or a pared down? And so one of the roles of this commission is to evaluate these things and say, either we think this is a good, but maybe too ambitious for now, or we think this is expensive, but you should do it. So there is gonna be that role as we move forward for this commission.
So I'm sorry, is there gonna be like a vote?
Not on this today, but this will be informing our budget discussions, which we will ultimately look for a formal recommendation to council.
Can I make a point? This is more a presentation point, having given literally maybe close to 1,000 presentations myself. The color scheme is horrible.
Noted. Thank you, Steve.
You need contrast so people can read it. There's words down there and I can't read them unless I got.
Understood. Thank you, Steve.
And I criticized the Brightworks people for the same thing.
Yes.
So,
So- I can't, is there something I should be looking at? I don't have anything on screen.
Are you sharing, Steve? Or we can fix that.
There
for
we
you.
go.
I see all of,
Chat.
see all of your lovely faces.
It's this one. There you go.
Thank you, Pam.
You're welcome, Mike.
There you go. This presentation was also linked in the agenda, so you can also pull it up on your device as well.
so one of the things that I would also recommend, and I see this all the time in my line of business, is looking at the total carbon footprint of the whole life cycle. And so when we're looking at not just the carbon footprint of the emissions of that vehicle, but what is the total carbon footprint from the beginning of manufacturing to the shipping? Because you don't get the full picture of what are we investing in and what's the return on that investment, unless you look at the entire, what's their carbon output footprint to get the battery components? What's the carbon footprint to actually ship that? And then on the end of it, the end of the life cycle, where does that go? Because it has to go somewhere. And then look at that entire carbon footprint before making a decision of saying, you know what, this small picture of the life cycle looks really good right here, and we're going to invest all this money. I would ask the consultants to at least put some type of a picture in front of the city council that kind of shows, hey, you're about to potentially invest this kind of money into these vehicles, especially as the vehicles get bigger. Your bigger trucks, your tractors. I mean, the footprint of the size of those batteries are massive. And so understanding the entire life cycle, all those vehicles that are digging all that up, those are producing carbon dioxide, and then going through that whole life cycle, the shipping, and then at the end of that life cycle. So they're getting paid a lot of money. And I used to work at KPMG Consulting, and even if we knew that, if we weren't asked to add it to the presentation, we left it out, especially if we thought that it was going to hinder our follow-on work. So I would lean on them to offer the full picture to the city council of the carbon emissions of before we go and spend that kind of money.
That's an interesting thought.
I think that's a great point. I think for this study, it is outside of the scope because we did ask them to look at the emissions from that side. They may have that information. It's definitely an interesting point that I'd be happy to ask, but I think the way we're at with this presentation right now, it is outside the scope, but I think that's great consideration for the future as well.
We may be able to come up with a general multiplier, however.
Yeah.
I would suggest also, since it's in several positions in the climate action plan, that you include the social cost of carbon in the calculation.
Well, and I think you and I haven't talked about this, but I've read, where are we getting the components for those batteries?
Yeah.
And I believe that eventually, just like diamonds, there'll be something called a blood there's blood diamonds that where they came from and how they were acquired were under slave labor and other things like that. And so you want to trace that back. I think the components for a lot of these batteries, are coming from similar type of situations. And I think there's going to be some type of a blood diamond link where you have to be able to prove that you did, these components that are coming into your batteries and your manufacturing didn't come from ill-begotten ways. And so I
Yeah.
think that the whole social part of that, and I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, but
No, what I'm referring to is, there's been numerous studies put on what, how harmful a metric ton of CO2 is to humanity. And you can, in health benefits or health degradation and so on. And there's been numerous attempts to put a dollar figure on that. So if you figure out, I'm gonna go replace my Ford Escape that I use for going around to job sites with a Tesla, and I'm gonna keep it for, I don't know, 100,000 miles. You can calculate how much, and also include the manufacturing generated CO2, and then come up with, I'm sure the Tesla's gonna beat the Escape, but that differential, you can put a dollar figure on that. So in the beginning, the electric car is costing more, you're gonna get your money back, it's.
Yep.
These are great points. Yeah, thank you. All right, let's continue. There we go. Great. Okay, so this slide is meant to orient to kind of the industry right now, what that's looking like. At present, there is some technological advancements and availability of light duty and medium duty vehicles. I'm sure we've all seen these on the road. The issue from the municipal side is procurement delays. So what we've seen personally in Sammamish, as well as in other jurisdictions, is delays by multiple months up to a year or more from when we actually order these vehicles versus when they're able to be put into service. For heavy duty and emergency fleet specifically, so this is snowplows, emergency management vehicles, the technology is not there for electrification, especially when you take it through a lens of level of service. So a lot of times during the winter, we have our snowplows running for 12, 24 hours straight, and that does not conducive for electrification. As part of this study internally, our fleet team, as well as the consultant, spoke with other cities. So across the board, we've seen electric vehicles make up about 5% of city fleets. So while city fleets such as the city of Seattle do have a much higher number of electric vehicles compared to Sammamish, they also have a much larger sized fleet overall. So we have seen across the board about 5% EVs right now. For reference, Sammamish is about 3%. Of our fleet. So we're looking to increase that through 2030 and 2050. I mentioned the supply chain issues, and R99 fuel is a diesel alternative. It's a renewable fuel based off of renewable resources. So think cooking oil that has been repurposed into a gasoline alternative or a diesel alternative. Something to note is that a lot of other fleets do have a leasing policy, which we do not currently, but it is something we can consider looking into. Specific green fleet policies outlining procurement requirements for electrification or utilizing incentives from the utilities.
So the R99 fuel, what kind of mileage do they get over standard diesel?
So it's almost a one-to-one replacement. It's drop-in fuel ready. And actually what we have seen in some of the use cases is that R99 fuel has reduced some of the maintenance requirements. So vehicles are going longer on R99 fuel than diesel without needing to get parts upgraded. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on as well.
About R99 or the?
R99. Yeah.
Save my questions for that. In terms of supply chain, is that really an issue? That's only an issue.
Yes.
I mean, I understand if I wanted to go buy an EV tomorrow, that's an issue, but are you trying to replace something now? This is a plan, right? So you can plan ahead, know it's gonna take you a year and place an order and be like a year when I need to replace that vehicle.
So it's not quite that simple because you do need to have the charging infrastructure as well. And that is usually a long planning process. So you don't want to procure a vehicle and then it's it's available all of a sudden 6 months early, but then it's just sitting on the lot because you don't have the charging infrastructure. You don't have a parking spot for it. So it is something to think about, but it's not as simple as just ordering in advance.
Because we have a fleet, it's not like bringing home one vehicle to your house and then putting it in, right? There's very significant infrastructure that has to go in order to support a fleet of vehicles.
Got it.
So, and then you have issues with PSE's availability, right, with your own contractor's ability. And then you still have issues with the way that municipalities purchase vehicles from a pool system. Then there are others. So there's multiple places where we've got timeline issues.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you're saying is that's all part of a plan, and you could saying that the short, the long pole in the tent is supply chain at this point seems a little out of place from just thinking through it logically, right? So if you're planning to, when these other vehicles can be replaced, you put a plan together, when your EV stations need to be implemented, you work backwards from that. Saying currently today that supply chain is going to help be a part of that delay doesn't really, for me anyway, and I think that's kind of what you were saying, doesn't really fit.
Yeah.
It feels like a problem you can solve. You can plan for to get out of. Yeah, some of this other stuff I get. But
It is part of the problem.
Yeah, because like, for instance, we have trucks that need to be replaced today, right? We can't go out and get whatever the 150 replacement is, even if we have decided to park them downstairs where we actually do have some infrastructure, right? So it's
For them to, a lot of,
it's a mix.
yeah, we have to also align it with our existing replacement schedule because we can't be waiting as a city for trucks if those trucks need to be going out with the maintenance crews.
yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Okay, so you have some you got to do today. Those fall to that problem. Others, as you
Right.
get a year out, a year and a half out, that no longer is no longer a problem. It feels
Absolutely.
like a crutch that you're.
It's more of it's more of a setting of expectations because we do have some council members that would like us to go out and purchase as many EVs as possible with the budget right now. And so it is partially the procurement issues of the EVs, but it is also the procurement issues of the charging equipment and the infrastructure upgrades. So it's yes and I guess
Well, my objection to that idea going purchasing all of them today. 96% is in 2050. Not in 2026.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you look at it, you can figure out what percent you gotta electrify going forward. We got 26 years to get there.
And then that's part,
25 and a half, maybe.
we'll at least show you through 2030.
Okay.
Okay, I know we're moving quickly. I apologize. Please continue to think about questions.
We can also do this and we can wait on the sustainability guide for next meeting. This is important stuff. We've got some interest, there's clearly interest and expertise, right? That this is the whole point of the commission. So it's okay if we don't get to the sustainability guide today.
Great. Giving some project background here. We did ask McKinstry and Makers to analyze 4 different sites. So this was a little bit broader. They did focus most of their analysis on City Hall and the Maintenance and Operations Center, as that is where most of our fleet and infrastructure is located and where the upgrades will be necessary. The South Yard and the Beaver Lake Shop are additional city properties with future investments. Beaver Lake Shop at the moment is used for a lot of small equipment and temporary parking of vehicles, and the South Yard is undeveloped. So through this analysis, we asked Makers to look at 165 fleet assets, as well as 164 small tools. Some of the fleet assets were located at offsite parking and storage areas. So we focused the charging infrastructure on those 4 sites. Some of the vehicles do move around to other sites, but would be charging at one of those 4 sites, most likely the City Hall and MOC.
And the 165 number, is that what percent of your overall fleet is that?
This is the whole fleet.
Is that?
This is
all?
everything. Yes.
Even the things that you said can't be done because the technology.
Go to the next slide, please, Rich. There you go. So, what you see in gray are attachments, boards, and trailers. Those are non-emission emitting assets. The light duty, medium duty, and heavy duty vehicles are in green, off-road equipment in orange, and motors in purple, the motors and small tools. Rich, if you could go to the next slide. There's a note here, the current level of service, while there is the technology for electrification of those motors and small tools with the current operations of our maintenance team and some of the caveats of operating those equipments, for example, backup batteries, the runtime, those are not eligible for electrification with the ability to maintain our current levels of service. You'll see they've categorized it a little bit. So the amount that is being targeted to reach our near-term goal of 20% electric vehicles by 2030, which is a goal that council passed on top of those emissions reduction goals. So they're both right sizing this for the emissions reductions and the 20% adoption by 2030. Any questions on those slides?
Well, so how many vehicles are we talking about? When we get to the dollars that it costs, how many actual vehicles are gonna go into the cost?
We'll get to that on the cost slide. There's a
Well, I-
breakdown.
Okay, I don't see it on that slide either. Okay, I just think, well, I keep seeing 165, so that's in my mind, but it looks like it's actually a great deal less than that.
It is,
It is
yeah.
significantly.
40. I think. Guessing from the numbers.
It's a little bit more than that.
So I just want on the level of service issue, and this is one of the things in the Q&A, right? Why can we just ban gas powered, mowers and blowers and things like that, right? There may be an opportunity at some point for this group to have a discussion about whether or not changing the level of service in, our vegetation management, our parks, that sort of thing. Right now we're mowing and blowing once a week out there, right? If we as a community decided to mow and blow every other week, that would have a reduction just right there, right? So I think there are multiple ways that we can look at all of these things. It's not always just about electrification. It's also about what we do and how we do, right?
Okay, so what we see in gray on this slide is the current emissions of our fleet from 2019. So this is in alignment with the climate action plan. We used a 2019 baseline. So from their analysis, we found that 70% of emissions are from the maintenance and operations center fleet. We did talk with our facilities team to make sure that this is an accurate number. And what we see here is our emissions before electrification in gray, and then in yellow is the end state after electrification. So this is for our 2030, which vehicles are going to be emitting emissions. So you see there's a big reduction in the light duty fleet. That's because there's a lot more light duty vehicles available right now. And we're able to maintain our current level of service and operational requirements by electrifying our light duty fleet. So that is the near term focus, with some electrification of the medium duty, heavy duty, and then off-road equipment as well.
And it's really conversion, not electrification of those heavy duty vehicles.
Yeah, so this is including if we were to add some of those vehicles with R99 fuel.
So that's why you don't get as much bang for your buck in the heavy duty, right? So, because you're still emitting, you're just emitting less.
Okay, so this is the electrification approach. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. There are some important strategy considerations to take in mind with this electrification approach. Because we are looking into the future and technology is continuing to develop, and we don't know exactly where the market is going to be in terms of how efficient vehicles are going to be, how available they're going to be, all of the different use cases for dump trucks, plows, etc. So we made some assumptions and there are some considerations to keep in mind. We did right size it for our current fleet count and operational requirements. Again, heavy duty and critical response fleet is not available for electrification right now and maintaining our current emergency response. The medium duty fleet is where a lot of those technological developments are really a little bit wiggling. So that's a caveat to keep in mind. And then as it comes to charging, we do need to install that charging infrastructure before we're able to procure all of those vehicles, as I mentioned previously. to keep our current level of operations with our fleet staff, we are not going to be doing a fleet musical chairs rotation to make sure we can charge all of our vehicles off of a very small number of chargers. We are installing a fair number of chargers to support those vehicles so that we don't have someone going and moving vehicles around at all hours of the night to make sure they're all charged. And this did not take into account charging for visitors, employees, or the city police and fire contracted fleet. So this is purely the internal city fleet used by our maintenance and operations team and parks team and other department teams. So now looking.
Any questions about those assumptions? And I also want you to.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay.
Okay. This is I expect there to be a little bit of discussion and questions about this slide. This is kind of getting into the meat of it. So there's the near term replacement. We currently have 3 electric vehicles. So that is 2 electric light duty vehicles and 1 electric off-road equipment. It's an electric Kubota. So this would be 55 total vehicles as electric, fully electrified. So that's 52 additional vehicles from what we have today. 16 vehicles in the light duty and medium duty fleet will be converted to hybrid or plug-in hybrid. And 16 of our medium and heavy duty vehicles will be switched to R99, which is the drop in diesel replacement. You'll see a note there at the bottom. R99 is, as I mentioned, a drop in replacement for diesel, and it has 66% lower emissions without much performance or maintenance impact. The key thing to note with R99 is that it is not commercially available. So we would need to have a discussion internally with the facilities team of how to store that fuel or where to source it from.
So how do you get gas or diesel fuel now? Do you go to the gas station?
We have tanks. We
Okay,
have a tank at the MOC and they're increasing it pretty significantly
so
right now.
you could get R99 in a tank.
Yeah, that's how I think, is it Issaquah who has R99? Yeah, they have a tank that
Okay.
you bring in, it gets filled.
How's the price relative to?
I was
Diesel
surprised that
only.
it is actually a little bit less right now.
Yeah.
Right now.
Right now, yeah. Years ago, no.
So that's-
Well, and a
that
few
sounds
years
like a
from now,
common
once
price.
you get more conversions, right? I think that's my concern is the
Scale.
And that's subject to all the road tax that gas and diesel are?
absolutely.
Yeah, figured
The
that.
state wouldn't miss out on that.
We're right. It's not the government.
Rich, could you go up to that side, sorry.
So there's your numbers.
So when you do that, do you make the resolution goal for 2030?
Yes.
So that you guys picked that number and worked way backward and said, here's what we're gonna convert to make that happen.
That is what
Okay.
we asked them to do. We asked them to make their phasing recommendations to meet our goals.
And it's additive to 2050, right? So it's not like you then have to veer somewhere else. You're getting to your 2050 goal by just getting to
And
2030.
I also point out, and this, David, this is a situation. The climate action plan only does with scope 1 and scope 2. So all of those emissions created by digging up don't count because they weren't in the city. I appreciate the irony there, but
Yeah. Yeah, but it's all about greenhouse gas, right? And
Yeah.
it doesn't stay in one, I mean, you know, again, that's the problem with the greenhouse gas calculations is when they're emitting it at the beginning of this life cycle somewhere else, it's still additive to
Yeah.
the globe. And so it's fair to say you should still look at that even though we're looking locally.
Right. Well, during the development of the climate action plan, the decision was made to ignore scope 3 and also ignore our aviation footprint because it's substantial given the wealth of this community. So those aren't in that whatever it is, half million metric tons of CO2 per year
That's some Sammamish emits.
Yeah.
Okay, So again, this is the near term on this slide is that chart, and then but the long term, we will be electrifying those hybrid and plug-in hybrid vehicles and switching the 16 R99 drop-in diesel replacements to electric vehicles. With the caveat, the technology needs to be there. So this is the long-term plan.
Somebody might call you on that at the council meeting, and pointing out that this is only scope 1 and scope 2 might satisfy.
Yeah.
So you should keep that in mind, I think.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, so where are you gonna get the R99? Who makes that stuff?
That is still up for evaluation. So yeah, our facilities team would be working on that.
But we have
can-
neighbors who are using it now.
Yeah, so
Okay, so it's not a pipe dream.
It's
No.
not a pipe dream.
no.
No, I think we have just real questions about long-term availability to scale. Right, that we need to do additional research on, because we don't have that information from
So
what's out of scope here.
is this the stuff they make, they go around to all the restaurants and collect the cooking oil and
Something like that.
clean it up
yeah.
and
Okay, so we've seen the vehicle electrification plan, or at least the high level. So to support those vehicles, we need additional charging. So what that looks like in the short term is adding capacity for the light duty fleet, and then any small tools that may be electrified between now and 2030, pending those level of service discussions and battery and technology improvements. It does require a service upgrade for both the MOC and the Beaver Lake shop. So that is a separate conversation with Puget Sound Energy, and requires additional costs that was outside of the scope of this work. It also looks like installing chargers at City Hall, and then in the long term, installing chargers at the MOC and South Yard. There were a number of assumptions that went into this charging plan. We are specifically focusing on level 2 and level 3 chargers. The project team determined that level 1 chargers really slow to charge, and they also don't have power management, so we wouldn't be able to track the charging, and we wouldn't be able to get potential credits back for off-peak hour charging.
do you know how many kilowatt hours of increased service you need?
Our infrastructure analysis does have those numbers, but I don't have it off the top of my head. Yeah.
So I want to just emphasize that part about the upgraded service to the MOC and the Beaver Lake shop is it's not just out of scope, it's not calculable until we go to PSE with here's what we want to do, and then PSE will tell us what that bill is, and also important on that, what their timeline is. So it could be a very large number, right? It's just gonna depend on.
And
what's
this
on
is,
their
I think
side.
it goes back to some of the initial questions we had in the first meeting or two, saying, you know, we've already got goals out there, but we haven't even done a feasibility study that says those goals are even realistic or achievable. And that kind of goes to some of the other stuff that we've been kicking around in our meetings is, that's great to have a goal, but one, how are we gonna track it? And if we as a committee think that that goal is just unachievable by anything you try to throw at it, making recommendations and saying, hey, here's a realistic goal, right? That whole SMART goal setting, right? Of aspirational is awesome. And it's great to say, hey, I think I saw David Pyle say something last city council that I missed. I was watching the recording and he said, you know, the city of Sammamish wants to lead by example. So they took what everybody else was doing and we set ours just a little bit higher so we wanted to say we were bleeding edge, right? But and I love that, but if it's unrealistic to actually hit that number, then it's just for marketing purposes, saying, hey, you know, why not say we're going to be 100% by 2040 because we're going to beat or 96% by 2040 because we're going to beat everybody's 2050 goal, right? At some point you have to then put a plan together where that's logical. And I think, you know, having an understanding of how you're going to meet these goals and then getting that feedback, I think is.
I agree. When do we get to talk to Puget Sound Energy?
They let me know June. They
Yeah.
should be coming.
Yeah, I mean, that's gonna be a big part, right? Because again, it is the work that we do, but we also have partners that are doing the work that we get credit for in achieving those goals, right?
And then Puget, obviously Puget Sound Energy, the big question isn't about how are we getting, what's the timeline for the city infrastructure? It's if we meet these goals, the electrical demand for the residents is going to be massive. What's your ability to, if we hit this, what is your ability to actually service that? And when is that timeline?
When we need you to ask hard questions when they come through the door. I'm not kidding, right? Because I think that is the big issue. We can run, right?
Yeah.
But if we get to that goal and there's not enough power on the grid, which we're all reading all of these, you know.
I think we have a homework assignment. We gotta come up with our Puget Sound Energy questions.
Yes.
There's yeah.
Yeah. Prepping for that next meeting, absolutely, please.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, because there's a lot, and we're hearing a lot on the news about PSC's made a statement, what was it, Monday, I think? That, you know, given our potentially bad fire season, they're gonna be cutting power. Mostly in central and eastern Washington. But
They will
still.
utilize rolling blackouts if needed.
Right. And yeah, I think that's going to be a big deal. Or potentially.
Well,
That's not necessarily about not having enough power. That's about them limiting their liability to potentially create a fire.
Oh, of course. I think they learned from PG&E
Yeah, over and
Yeah.
over again, right?
over and over. We've seen this movie.
And we talked about in one of our previous meetings, during the summer, I mean, California cannot produce enough electricity as it is, and they're, very small. They have to buy power from us. And in the winter, we can't produce enough power for the electric demand that we have now, and we have to buy power from California and other places. So if we can't currently with our electric demand, and all the infrastructure that's set up, meet the current demand, and we're gonna, especially if we're going with all the households, going off gas, we haven't even talked about that, right? And just the electric grid, I think there's a huge just question. And again, I go back in my head to feasibility. What's the feasibility, and how do we help the city council put those pieces together to push back and have data that shows, hey, and again, I realize a lot of these are coming down from the state level too, state and the county, and then the city is trying to, okay, it must be doable because, everybody else is doing it. And we want to keep up with everybody else. We don't look like we're the ones lagging behind. But I think if we can help you put enough information together that says, hey, we're actually going to go after this because we've talked to all the experts, and, they can't even supply if 50% of the houses went off of gas, that demand, they can't even build that infrastructure into the city of Sammamish for all their other planning for until 2040. And then we could start thinking about unwinding that thing. And I think that's kind of the biggest, again, I think it's the emperor hasn't no clothes, right? I mean, do we say it, or do we just kind of keep going along with everybody else because everybody else is not pointing it out? And so I think that's, again, our kind of goal as the council, our commission, is to try to figure that out and then guide or give some input to the city council as they're making these decisions. And because they're running on some of this stuff. Right. This is what some of them got voted in for. And so if it comes in for reelection and there's nowhere near what these goals are, if we can get out ahead of that, and that, again, going back to some of the stuff I do every day in my job, a lot of these things, they don't look at the full life cycle. And so they get in trouble when they didn't calculate for some of this other stuff. And then people kind of start pointing fingers. Well, they didn't, Puget Sound Energy, or they didn't tell us it was their timeline was this. So when I'm pushing back on some of this stuff, it really is coming from are we just going to go on with everybody else, or are we actually going to start asking some tough questions and really starting to push that back out there?
And that's why next month with PSC is going to be so key, right? Because I think the other they're going to push back and say is it's storage, it's battery storage. Is this community going to be ready for battery storage, right? Because that's a thing. And I think I talked about it a couple meetings ago. It's controversial.
It seems to me that it should be feasible, given the the historical electricity use that, again, it's in the climate action plan, that we ought to be able to make some projections, extrapolate forward with some sort of scenario with respect to how much, what's the rate of conversion from natural gas, gasoline, whatever, to electricity. And say, okay, you guys delivered 400 million kilowatt hours to Sammamish and according to your numbers in 2019. And if these many people convert in 2030, we're gonna need 650 million kilowatt hours. Can you provide that?
Well, I think the big challenge, and I've got a buddy who does this for the city of Seattle, he's one of their PEs for their distribution, is one, the ability to generate it. The second, and I think the more important piece is the ability to deliver it, right? All these substations are rated at a certain capacity currently today, and a lot of them in Sammamish are underground. If you want to put just one power pole underground for a view or whatever reason, the city of Seattle, if you went to the city of Seattle and said, hey, we want to move this line that's in our view today, we want to move that from one pole to another, their initial estimate is $1 million.
Yeah, it's not feasible.
Because
So
it's,
you're talking about the big line that's running down 228?
no, any line.
No, any residential line to underground is so expensive.
So because the work on these substations, so again, the generation of it is one issue. The distribution of it is a whole
That's-
separate issue, and their ability, now Puget Sound Energy's ability to the one say, okay, here's when we think we can deliver that type of capacity that you guys are forecasting for. That's on the generation side. Then it's gonna be, well, when are we gonna be able to upgrade all these substations? And a lot of them are underground, and then they have to build out that infrastructure, so double the size of that. Well, then they're getting into their own feasibility study of groundwater, and other easements. This is now, going in, so it's my challenge with some of these initial targets have always been the lack of a true feasibility study that shows, hey, here's all the different pieces that are going to push into this final, us being able to meet this. And we've checked, with Puget Sound Energy, their ability to generate it, their ability to deliver it. I have a ton of gas in my house. My panel on my house is pretty much maxed out. It's a 200 amp. So even if I wanted to switch over, then I still have to upgrade that panel. And then if everybody in my neighborhood did it, is the substations that's providing that's near my house, is that able to handle everybody in our neighborhood upgrading off of gas to electric? So again, I know I went off a little tangent, but
No, I think you're exactly right. And then are we as a community going to welcome additional high capacity transmission lines? Because that's what it's gonna take, not just for Sammamish, right? But across the region. We all remember Electrified Bellevue, that it wasn't like everybody was, singing happy songs when they came through 148. So there's the technical, right? And then there's what is a community's appetite truly for when that substation increase encroaches on your neighbor's house, right? Or when that high capacity line has to go through you, or when the battery storage facility goes cross street from your kid's school, right? There's all of these different things that happen.
Well, wait, so why don't we send these questions to PSC, so when they present, they're answering the questions, not listening to us then and saying, I'll get back to you. So why not, your question, I think is a great one, like, what are you projecting us to need in 2030? I think your idea about the capacity and how they're gonna do it by 2030, I think these are questions we want answered when they present, not in the meeting.
Yeah,
because if they're not,
I'll get back to you, never.
Right, well, right, I mean, that's what we wanna know, we don't wanna know, we don't wanna see a dog and pony show, we wanna say, what are you building for Sammamish, and are you gonna do it in time when we need it?
Yeah, because I think you need to keep in mind that a lot of these requirements that are in the climate action plan that the state and federal level are based on what it's gonna take to keep the temperature from exceeding some value. So you're right, they didn't do, okay, how do we get there study? They just looked, okay, we can't go above this 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees or whatever you want. So what do we have to do to not get there? Well, we gotta stop producing CO2. This much, we gotta reduce.
Yeah, fair enough, but somebody has to actually implement it, and we're
Yeah.
down at the implementation level. So
Well,
But if it's in
which way it
Well, if
plays.
it's in their planning, then I think we have to say if it's in your planning and you can meet the things that we're gonna need in 2030, I think that's what we wanna know.
well, because then that's great that's great data for the city council. Because the city is the one that has
Can
to
you
meet
get
some of
them
these
to
goals.
answer these? I think both Steve and David are asking questions. We don't wanna wait till then.
Yeah,
Let's
that's
give them
great.
time to prep.
I like
Yeah,
that.
and I can tell you, speaking with some of the other jurisdictions that have my position in other jurisdictions, these conversations have been ongoing. There has been a little bit of pushback, PSC is working on this, and there has been some sunshine and rainbows projection while the reality may be different. So continuing to press them, and absolutely, I've spoken with them already about some of what you're talking about, but some of these specific questions, same as with the question and answer document, send them to me and I will reach out to PSC in advance. And that is where their presentation is focused, is on their 2030 and 2045 goals, and their clean energy
For Sammamish, for the city of Sammamish.
specifically.
We wanna know city of Sammamish, what are you gonna bring here?
Yeah, so I'm not sure that they even have that level of specificity yet, so it's a great question. Yeah.
Well, then the
Imagine
next,
that they will.
the next question is, because the city of Sammamish is making commitments, right? And putting out dashboards and if they don't have the projections to tell us when they think they can come up with this stuff, how can we confidently put out a dashboard that says these are our targets? You might as well just throw, again, rainbows and unicorns out there, because it doesn't
All right,
make-
well, let's see what they say. Let's see what they say. We got, if we put the questions to them
Devil's
and
in
we
the
think the
details.
answers are weak.
The Clean Energy Transformation Act does have deadlines of 2030 and 2045, which the PSC strategic plan is working towards, but I also think the grid capacity conversation, the Sammamish specific conversation, these are great targeted questions that we should be asking of them. So thank you all. I'll have a more formal question gathering process via email following today's meeting.
Okay.
All right.
With our 13 minutes.
So this is a little bit more of that breakdown. So we saw the charging plan through 2030 and 2050. This is kind of showing that visually, what is happening specifically at each location. At the follow-up presentation, both to the Sustainability Commission and Council in June, they will be showing when these upgrades should happen in a phased approach and how much it's going to cost per year to get there. So this is the overall plan, and they're going to be showing us over each year, when do we install these chargers and what does that look like and what does that cost?
So a level 2 charger can have, it's like 220 volt, some number of amps. You can calculate, you can make some assumptions that a thing's gonna be used 12 hours a day. If you know the amperage, you can calculate how many kilowatt hours it's gonna deliver.
Yeah, so part of this work is Makers is providing us with an electrification modeling tool that will have an inventory of different electric vehicles. It will show the emissions for those vehicles, the cost for those vehicles, and it will allow our fleet manager to have a holistic view, and he can swap out and use that tool to project forward exactly as you're speaking.
When are they gonna give you this tool?
We have the draft tool, so we're reviewing it right now.
Okay.
All right, next slide. So before we show you the big cost diagram with the big numbers, we're almost there. It's the
We're gonna
next
get
slide. So we just wanted to be very clear about what is in scope and what was considered and what is known versus what are unknown and potential future costs. So this is a baseline number that we're using for planning purposes, and it will likely only increase. And this is why. So we've talked about a lot of these issues and considerations throughout the presentation. So this is just a holistic view and kind of summarizing what went into this cost number, which go ahead, Rich. So 15.7 million all in, not including the service upgrades, not including the cost of R99 fuel, and not including the replacement of electric vehicles. So a lot of these electric vehicles that we might be purchasing from now through 2030 have 7 to 10 year life cycles. So they will need to be replaced again before 2050. That cost was not included in this number because we don't quite know where the market is going to be. And there might be different options for leasing. And we wanted to really just get this baseline with the existing vehicles as we replace them through 2030, projecting out into 2050. So what that looks like is 5.2 million in fleet costs through 2030. It's important to note that that 5.2 million is not for the entire fleet. That is for those 52 vehicles turning to electric and those 16 for hybrid and plug-in hybrid. So it's for reference, the whole fleet as it is today was about 4.5 million for the entire fleet. So to replace that subset through 2030 is going to be over $5 million. So that's a significant increase. We also have considerations for the charging infrastructure, the chargers, which are separate from the infrastructure to support the physical chargers, backup power in case of power outages, so we can keep that emergency fleet ready to go. And then there's also software and maintenance costs for the charging infrastructure.
So I'm the sustainability commissioner, and I'm just wondering, of that number, is that the best use of $15.7 million to reduce our emissions?
That's a great question.
Well, it's not a
Yeah.
facetious question. It seems like a lot of money, and I'm just saying, what I think the council needs to consider is that the most impactful for a reduction in our emissions?
Yeah, a couple other ones to add to that, but along the same lines, right? Like one, it says through 2030. So this is over a time horizon that you're spending this. So probably helpful to see sort of by year what you want to spend. Maybe that's another slide later.
That's the follow-up presentation.
Yeah, June.
Got it. The other one is, yes, that looks like a lot of money. I think, the council will know, but I don't know what percent of the budget that is. Maybe that's 1%, so maybe it's not a lot of money. And then the other one is, that's the true cost, but there's a marginal cost to this, right? Like you're gonna have to spend money on the fleet anyway. Like that should be subtracted out of that number, right? Like you should say, yeah, we're gonna do 13 million for the fleet anyway, so it's really only $2 million
So if
additional.
we didn't do
cost.
anything electrification wise, we'd still.
Still-
spend on the fleet.
You're still buying on fleet. Now it's gonna be not 2 million.
That's a good point.
Right.
Some of those costs are non-recurring.
Sure, but yeah, so that number looks big and scary. Probably is. But some of those questions are really outstanding when I look at that number, but I don't.
So the second bullet gives you an idea as we look to the coming biennium, right? If we were to start implementing, right, we would spend 160%.
So the 1.4 million in the next 2-year budget is 160% over what you would normally do for fleets to start the plan.
And largely that's because of all of the infrastructure, right? The vehicles are starting to, but the amount of infrastructure becomes an issue. So the other thing that this doesn't include is electricity costs as well, which will go up.
But you avoid gasoline.
That's the
Yeah.
marginal cost.
We spent 112,000 a year in gas.
I-
So
Going to that full, again, life cycle. Also looking at, what is producing electricity that's putting it on the grid, right? So if it's a coal fire plant.
Yep.
I mean, you're swapping one fossil fuel for another fossil fuel. And so you're not really, again, it's looking at understanding that full life cycle, I think, is the right thing to do. Now, a lot of people don't like to look at that because it's not as nice when you start adding up all these other pieces and when you get full life cycle. But again, full transparency is the full life cycle, right? Some of that electricity is going to be coming from coal fire plants.
No, 2025 PSE
not
has to
from
be out of.
PSE.
No, but when we're buying off other, the grids and during the winter.
CETA, the Clean Energy Transformation Act, is requiring all Washington utilities to be off of coal by 2025.
Yes, but if we're buying it from California, my assumption is we're going to buy it from a coal facility before we shut people's electricity off.
Well, then Puget Sound Energy is gonna be.
And-
The answer is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would be curious too.
So, yeah.
Well, you get into life cycle costs, you think about how heavy EVs are, what's the effect on the roads, right? We have to, replace the roads more often. So there's a whole, I think some of that is also why people don't go. It's such a big thing, right? So we do have to kind of keep our.
But again, to Paul's point, we're spending 15.7 million of our residents' money. And we should understand, not just go after the marketing, hey, we got our whole fleet electric, and not calculating all the rest of that full life cycle.
And I'm not saying don't spend it. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
is that the best way?
Is that right? Is that the biggest
It's your
gain?
biggest carbon reduction ROI.
Well, and when you go back to earlier in the slide where it showed the wedge of transportation versus the wedge of the other two.
Precisely.
Yeah, but that's for the whole community. Does that apply to the city? I mean, the biggie is natural gas use. In the city, the community is burning it to heat their houses. And that's
So are we.
an 800-pound gorilla. And but you guys aren't 22,000 homes.
Right.
We're relatively, not exactly comparable, but we do have a number of city facilities using high amounts, running more than a necessarily residential home would. So I think it is somewhat comparable, and the transportation is a factor, but it may not be the largest factor. I think a lot of this is through the lens of the microcosm of the wider goals. So what does that look like for the city? That looks like specifically with transportation, 2050, 2030. Yeah.
So all that said, Rose, I think you did a really good job of covering a lot of slides. It made sense and it could be followed. So well done.
Thank you all for your patience with that. Apologies for the little bit of time stress, but it's important work. These are great questions.
I think this conversation is exactly why the Sustainability Commission exists,
Yeah.
right? So I just really appreciate it and being willing to say, hold on, what about this, right? And that's exactly what we need. So thank you. Keep it up.
And there will be a second installment of this presentation at the June meeting showing that phasing approach and the yearly spending. There also is one of those graphics shows what the yearly spending would be on average for ICE vehicles compared to what the infrastructure and EV costs would be on top of that. So I'm looking forward to us all seeing that. I think it'll help kind of show that whole picture. The goal with this is to provide a lot of the background, what it took to get to that number. And then we're going to break that number down and make it a little bit easier to digest and show the phasing approach. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Great. We're close on time here. We'll get to the, so we'll get to the Sustainable Sammamish Guide next time. I did want to give Paul a moment.
And any commissioner.
Any commissioners, yeah.
Any staff, right?
Yeah.
So we're moving on to the commissioner and staff reports. So Paul,
So this is something, I looked at the climate action plan and I wanted to keep a near-term perspective on how we're doing. And so I've come up with a quarterly look at some key metrics on the path to achieving the city's cap goals. So all of these that you see, I've obtained and tabulated. And then, so I think I'm gonna do it quarterly. I'd like the commission to review it quarterly. And then Tim, maybe you can talk about that bottom section on communication. And on the flip side, Tim has come up with some ways, because communication is so much a part of what we've talked about in our first 3 meetings, as far as getting our community to better understand the issues. Communication seems to be an integral part of the effectiveness of the commission. So
Just to briefly summarize, like a lot of what we've talked about in previous meetings is we're going to rely on the citizens of Sammamish staff to make change for any of this to happen, particularly natural gas, that kind of stuff. So how do we effectively communicate with the citizens of Sammamish is something we should try to measure our best, right? It's going to be one of those causation, not correlation kind of things, right? But if we can get lots of engagement, lots of outwardly projecting stuff to our citizens and figure out what works and what drives engagement, we can then over time look at it and be like, that we did this thing in Q3 last year. We really saw a big spike in Q1. And then if you see it again and again in
Do more of that.
time, we should do more of that, right? And so you want to drive engagement. So we want to count really anything we can count and see what happens. So Paul and I had sat down and we talked about like, what do we know? We know people that are coming to the city website. We should be able to track that, I assume. And this is assumptions I made off of working in the internet. Right? Like Facebook is going to have all these numbers that you can get from Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, whatever it is. You can download these things, and when we put up a post, we can count them, and then we can see what happens over time and what gets engagement. The other really interesting one I like that's not quite so quantifiable, but it's the events. Farmers market. When people show up, we should count how many people are showing up. And try to track what as best we can, what they're doing, what they're asking, and what we're talking about, so we can do this over time and figure out what it is. Because that's what we need. We need that engagement, and this is the way to know. That cover, Paul?
So we need the staff's cooperation on the communication tabulations. That's why they're blank. They're not something we retained yet. And then the other ones, it's obtainable. So I'll just keep doing them. Just showing us the progress we're making. Are we going in the right direction? And so that's what I've got.
So we'd be happy to work with you to refine some of this. We're not on TikTok, and if I have anything to do with it, we never will be.
Well, maybe the federal government.
Right, exactly.
Like, anyway.
So, but we'd be happy to work with you to refine, this kind of stuff, and those stats are fairly easy to, easy for.
Should be
Especially because we have a new communications manager who started today, so.
So do we need to do a public records request, or how do we get them so we can get this on a timely basis?
So you're wanting quarterly reports for all of this is what the ask is from the commission?
And I believe, like you said, the top three you'll do.
Yeah, like I'll do the transportation, building, water, waste, and then the communication.
Quarterly reports on what the communications person is doing. From
So-
sustainability, I assume they're doing more than just sustainability.
Yes.
So it's like, how many sustainability related posts do we send out over Facebook a quarter?
It's the
And
piece
then
of
next
paper
quarter
you
could be
guys
more or
have
less.
in one of the attachments that was sent
No,
out.
I just brought this. I just brought this.
Pam, I will email it to you.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you. I'm busy searching through email going, I think I'm missing something.
Oh.
Okay,
Yeah, these should be standard reporting and whatever. These are my guesses based on working at Amazon. Whatever is the standard reporting. I'm not asking you to go off and create a bunch of new stuff, but as a Facebook user, you should be able to pull down your engagement.
I think you should also figure out which ones are coming from the city of Sammamish, the location. Just to make sure that you're talking about residents only.
Fair.
Now, unless you can VPN, you can look all that stuff, but for the most part, I think understanding where they're coming from, who's hitting the city of Sammamish Facebook page or Twitter. There's a lot of trolls out there that just like to find stuff and argue about it, and they're not necessarily our resident.
So how about staff takes a look at this and comes back? So there are some things, we want to make sure that we're tracking, to your point, right? Tracking good stuff. So let us talk to the communications manager about what's the cadence that works. And we should look at past stats, right? If we don't have much on a quarterly basis, maybe, and that sort of thing.
But I think that's a great learning, because then we ask the question of why are we doing more if this, right? Like,
Or they come back and
community
they say, hey, we could pretty easily do this once a month and you guys could have updated stats at your monthly meeting.
and I'm happy to talk.
But I guess here's my question. Is it how much we post on Facebook, or is it how many heat pump conversions we get on a quarterly basis?
Well, that's,
It's both, and.
it's to Rose's answer earlier, it's yes and. Right, like, if we have a fundamental belief that people are not moving to heat pumps because they don't know about them, because they're not thinking about them, because they only think about them when they're in an emergency because their heater has just gone out. So you got to get them beforehand. So if we start posting in, let's call it September, about all the benefits of a heat pump, when people turn their furnaces on in October, November, and they don't work, they've seen information about heat pumps like, oh, okay, great. Now I have a new idea in my head that I saw this thing or whatever, right? And so it's not, we won't be able to draw a direct line of like, we did this and then we saw this big bump, because that's not how this space works with heat bumps. But it does, you do a lot of these posts, you're gonna drive awareness, which is what we talked about needing. This is the only way to measure awareness, at least that I know of. And then you see that heat pump rise eventually over time. And so that's how it works. And the idea is that this stuff is readily available to the communications manager, because you have these accounts, you just download them. It should be
Yep.
super
And
light.
communications and its incentives as a whole. You guys know, there's a whole bunch of elements.
Yeah, we can add other things.
But you
it-
should also know what the universe is that's actually following us on Facebook and
We
Twitter.
should know.
Because
Well, then we have to, but if we're charged
That's
with
the-
communicating to our
exactly.
almost 70,000 residents,
Right.
and we only have 500 Facebook users, then the question really is how effective are we in our communicating? What else can we do?
Right. And the-
Because changing hearts and minds means reaching 70,000, not 500.
Yeah. And the communications manager, I assume, will have plans on like, how do we grow this? Like, one of the goals they would, I would imagine, have is grow your Facebook following, grow your TikTok following.
Well, and to your point, it's
Um,
funny you say 500, because on your YouTube channel, there's only 463 followers on the city of Sammamish.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought that, I was super surprised there was only that little of people out of the 70,000.
the secret of local government is if you're doing it right, people don't follow you. They're not interested. If you're doing it wrong, they will come and let you know. Right, Mary? Wow, Mary's been watching this councilman. Right.
But we can, we can try things
So,
to drive it up in a good way, right?
right.
We can change that and be like, hey, we have the best city
Yep.
Facebook account, because we do like,
Right.
hilarious things about whatever, like you drive those things.
Example, there's 36,000 or so voters in this city.
Right.
11 or 12,000 voted in the last election.
Exactly. That's
Oh,
exactly.
yeah, and you do it quarterly, because it's not like we need 70,000 followers. You're like, oh, wow, we increased our follower rate by 10%.
Exactly. Is it the right direction?
And
That tells us a
that's
lot.
what, yeah, that's what you're looking at. It's your baseline against what we have. You don't baseline against the city, and you're like, let's grow it.
And communication is key. Maybe it's a budget item. Maybe it's a budget item for us to say, look, we gotta reach them. How do we reach them and spend money to do it?
Can I ask a couple of
What
questions
is-
about this?
What does your youth say? Because a lot of times if you want to learn recycling, you teach the kids and then they go home and teach everybody. So what do you think?
Did this for one, there's another zip code. 980.
Yeah, this is a zip code that and if there's another zip code, but it can't overlap. I mean, it's gotta be just some manage.
Yeah. I think the 74 and 75 are basically two in the city.
Okay, I can get
There's-
70. Okay, I'll
There's
get
a little
74.
bit of some other one. I don't know what it is.
Okay.
3 school districts.
I'll request 74 then too next time. Good idea.
So on the buildings and energy, what are these actual residences?
So we are
You
at
think-
overtime.
There's no thing- I can ask, I can stay
Yeah.
after that in here, because I like your ideas.
I have a quick, staff report is next Saturday at 10 is the groundbreaking for the town center. To, Mary Wichter's point about one of the things that we can do to, for our sustainability goals is to build smaller, more dense areas, and so this is really gonna kick that off. So 10 AM, Lower Commons Park, if you wanna, it's just gonna be right there at the corner of Lower Commons and 222nd. The city and the STC, our Innovation Realty Partners, are doing a joint effort. We have Congresswoman Schreier coming, Dow Constantine, the county executive. We have 3 county council members, though, maybe 2. So Sarah Perry, who represents us here, and then Claudia Balducci, who's also on Sound Transit. We have some folks from the state delegation, and we're expecting the majority of the city. So come and join us, and it's a big deal.
When,
Saturday, the 18th, next Saturday, the 18th at 10 AM.
okay.
And it's at Lower
and-
Commons and 222nd, right there at the
Okay,
entrance of
okay,
Lower
okay.
Commons. So if you can and feel like it, if you park here and walk over, that'd be great, but otherwise we'll have folks flagging people around for parking and things like that. But it's exciting. So we're gonna build a neighborhood, so.
Either that or build,
Alright.
walk, ride your bike to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Alright, So before I call for adjournment, Ryan, I wanted to get your, some input from you. Kind of what do you think? How was your first experience?
I think it was good. I think I'm gonna get home and do like more studying about this and get like more knowledge. I think like in order to promote this, I feel like I remember back then, the city of Sammamish used to like visit the schools sometimes and just like promote it to the youth, like about our actions and just go to different elementary schools and it will really like help them improve their knowledge.
I like that. I think that's a good idea.
Maybe that's another educational.
100%.
Tell the kids and have them go home and tell mom and dad.
All right. Thank you, Brian. All right. I moved for adjournment.
Seconded.
All right. We are adjourned.